Not every student is going to learn best in a certain setting. Kids need options, family needs options.
It literally is a question of how do we help our public schools? You certainly don't help them by removing $500 million from their revenues.
Having that option for parents that their students are not being well served in a public setting is so important.
It's going to take a lot of dollars away from public education. The charter schools will take dollars away from public education. And our Constitution states that we will provide a free and thorough public education.
The charter schools are outperforming the public schools. So when there's competition in the market, it forces people to do better.
This is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Crisis in the Classroom.
And good evening, I'm Armstrong Williams, and welcome to our second Crisis in the Classroom panel on school choice. Tonight, we're in San Antonio, Texas, just days away from the start of a very special legislative session on this very issue. School choice advocates say letting parents redirect their tax dollars to charter and private schools will give Texans more flexibility and freedom to make sure their children receive a quality education. Opponents, on the other hand, argue increased school choice would negatively impact public schools, especially those in rural areas, putting certain students at a risk of even greater disadvantage. Micah Atkinson from CBS Austin breaks down both sides for us tonight and the political battle looming at the state capitol.
It wasn't long after the legislature's school choice package proposing state funds for private education fell through before Governor Greg Abbott said he'd call an education-focused special session. Now, this morning, he says that session could begin in just a matter of days.
In 2 weeks, we're having a special session begin.
The topic of school choice, often known simply as school vouchers or an education savings account, is complicated getting into the politics of it all because it's not quite red versus blue. A number of Republicans oppose giving taxpayer money to private education, enough that it tanked the school choice package in the Texas House during this year's regular session.
Has anything changed since then?
Well, I hope so. The Texas House historically has been denying parental rights and parental choice in education. It's time for that to change.
But the Senate and Governor Greg Abbott are on board with school choice, which raises a question from some skeptics. Will the legislature push through a sweeping education package with teacher pay raises and increases to school funding, but also includes vouchers?
Would you vote for that?
No, absolutely not. That would be such a bad decision of getting short-term gain at the expense of our entire public education system.
But that may be a possibility. School choice supporters did try a last-minute effort to pass a package like that back in May.
I think one big take it or leave it package is probably the legislative vehicle that is most likely to produce a voucher policy in Texas. Ultimately, vouchers on their own have not been successful or popular enough within the legislature to move through the process.
Last week, Governor Abbott said that if the legislature doesn't come to an agreement, he would call another special session on education right afterward. But then he indicated that he would turn it over to voters to elect lawmakers that support school choice, possibly implying that he'll only push the legislature so far. In Austin, I'm Michael Atkinson reporting.
Let us welcome our very distinguished panelists. Corey DeAngelis is a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children and a visiting fellow at Stanford University Hoover Institution. Mandy Drogan is campaign director for Next Generation Texas and the former president of the Texas Federation for Children PAC. Stacy Childs is a member of the Texas State Board of Education and a former 4th grade and 5th grade teacher in Texas. And Jaime Pinte is the Director of Economic Opportunity for the organization, Every Texan. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us. And let us start with you, Ms. Childs. You know, you heard the package earlier. What is it that you challenge, and what do you think you can embrace?
I just have one question for the people that are proponents of these vouchers in the system. How is it going to work? We're talking about in 2 weeks, nearly $14 billion likely spent on students across Texas, and we don't even have a plan. We don't know where the money is going. We don't know which students are going to benefit from it. And I think that's way too risky, and it might impact several students across Texas negatively.
But what gives you hope in the package?
I don't know what the package entails. And I think that is a lot of my drawback, and when I hear from constituents across Texas, that's some of their drawback too, because there's not a thought-through plan.
Corey, how do you address her concerns?
This is thought through. Over 30 states in the country already have some form of private school choice today. And over the past 2 years, 10 states have already gone all in on school choice, passing universal education freedom, mostly in the form of education savings accounts. And that's just happened in 2 years, but we've had historically large gains in expanding education freedom. The basic response is that this is funding students as opposed to systems. This is funding the student directly, allowing families to take that money to the school of their choice. That could be the public school. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school, but for real this time. But if not, you can take that funding to pay for private school, charter school, or a home-based education option. Just like we do with higher education with Pell Grants, the money follows the child. You can take that scholarship to a public university if you want. You can also go to a private university. We do the same thing with pre-K programs, including Head Start. The funding follows the decision of the parent. Think about food stamps. You can choose a private grocery store that works best for you. We apply that same logic to K-12 education to fund people, not buildings, to fund students, not systems.
Now, Jaime, you have a very different perspective. You say the push for vouchers coincides with parents' frustrations with school leaders, the teachers and the librarians, and some lawmakers agree with you. Can you connect the dots for us here, and why do you think the two are so intertwined?
Excuse me, that's a great question. And I think as we've seen over the last 2.5 to 3 years, the attacks on public education through the curriculums, library books, the attacks on teachers, the attacks on school boards have all been a strategic function of the voucher effort, of the push to defund our public education system, to take public education away from the 5.5 million public students who rely on that, on those systems, and the communities who rely on those schools. Because one of the only ways that we will allow public education to be taken from us as Texans, a constitutional right of ours, is by having it demonized, having it attacked, having people, teachers being called indoctrinators and pedophiles, and all of this like outrageous accusations against the public school system has been used to prime the governor's push for vouchers.
So, Mandy, listening to his argument, do you take issue with anything that he said?
All of it. It's all hypotheticals.
Okay.
And there's no facts. So I'd like to address we haven't seen a plan. So.
But address.
Okay, so let me start
please.
with him. That's nonsense. People are not trying to attack teachers. In fact, it was the very same people that were standing with parents to push education savings accounts who also stood with teachers and tried to get nearly $4 billion directly to teacher pay. That's what happened when they were debating HB 100.
There are two different bills.
And sir.
Let her finish.
HB 100 is exactly where we tried to help say more money into the classroom, because I'm a parent. I'm not sure if y'all are parents, but as a mom, no one loves my children like I do. And Texans know that no one loves their children like they do. And so when we're talking about this, we pushed for teachers who the two most positive indicators on a child's life is the teacher in the classroom and the parent. So we stand with teachers. So to imply that somehow that when we're talking about the real stories of real Texans and they're sharing experiences and they are saying that my child is trapped in a school or a classroom that is not right for them, that doesn't mean that we're trying to do anything to harm public schools or teachers.
Is there anything unreasonable about what she just pushed back on?
I think for me, the unreasonable part is denying that we passed anti-CRT legislation, denying that there have been personal attacks made on teachers throughout the state over the last 2.5 years. That one of the things that the governor uses in his rhetoric to promote this particular policy is direct attacks on teachers and how they are indoctrinators. And so one of the things that I would say is that you can look at the the Butt Foundation poll recently that shows teachers are being attacked, that shows teachers feel attacked in their classroom because of this anti-public education rhetoric.
So I think
No. So Stacey, I'm going to come to you. Other school choice critics here in Texas have pointed to the rural districts as a major reason why a statewide voucher system wouldn't necessarily work. Do you think there's a way to expand school choice in Texas while also keeping in mind the needs of the rural constituency?
As it relates to private schools right now, no. I mean, we do have public charters as an option. And I think there's a lot of confusion as to whether or not charter schools are public schools. Charter schools in the state of Texas are public schools. But when it comes to private schools...
Why do you say this? They are public schools?
Because they get state dollars.
Okay.
And those state dollars go
It's the
directly
money.
to the public charters. It's the money.
Okay.
I'm a money girl. It's all about the money. But when it comes to rural areas, if we're going to give these educational spending accounts to parents in rural areas, where is the private school that they're going to go to? Some of these parents might have to drive 30 minutes to an hour and a half just to go to the school of their choice. How's that going to work? Isn't that going to disenfranchise some people that are in those rural areas?
So
correct.
It's already worked.
Correct. Wait. Doesn't she make an argument about the hardship on some parents in terms of logistics and the other areas she mentioned? Is that not
it's
a
not
legitimate?
a legitimate argument to trap kids in failing schools that aren't working for them? And I
But
will
I don't think she's talking about. But in terms of what about the hardships?
Yeah, there are kids that are facing hardships in failing government schools today, and we should give them more opportunity, not trap them in a failing system that's not working for them. The 9 most rural states in the country all have some form of private school choice already. That includes West Virginia, which was the first state to go universal on school choice in 2021. Maine and Vermont, they've had the oldest voucher programs in the country, started in the late 1800s. Why did they start those programs? They're called town tuitioning. They understood that when families in rural districts did not have public schools to go to because they were so rural, what did they do? They expanded opportunity, didn't limit it. They gave vouchers to parents to go to public schools in nearby districts or even to private religious or non-religious schools. So hopefully Texas can learn from states like Maine and Vermont what they figured out over 100 years ago, that if anything, not having a lot of choice is an argument to expand opportunity, not to restrict it.
Quickly, is he out of touch?
A little bit out of touch.
How?
I used to be a teacher, and I used to work very hard. And I know some of my friends that are still in the classroom in public schools are working very hard. Why are we not pouring that money into teachers? The National Council of Teacher Education just did a poll. 48% of the people that took that poll said that teacher retention is the #1 issue as it relates to education. Why are we not bringing more teachers in, and why are we not giving more money to teachers? Why are we going to take billions of dollars and try to put it towards schools and we don't even know if that plan is going to work?
Mandy?
So Stacy said I'm a money girl. Well, I'm a mommy. And I could talk money. Let's talk money.
Okay.
Since 1970, here in the state of Texas, we have increased public school funding by 166%. Unfortunately, that money is being used for profiteers that do not send it into the classroom. Girl, you and I agree with you. I want more money in my child who goes to a public school. I want it in her classroom. The fact is, teacher pay raises for the same period of time when adjusted for inflation has already only gone up 16%. Why in the world are we allowing these unions and these educrat profiteers to keep the money from our kids? I want as much money possible in that classroom. And I'm tired of seeing this debate about how parents don't stand with teachers because of money. That is completely false. Look, the legislature just signed the largest public education funding increase. $10.3 billion was appropriated in House Bill 1, the budget for public education. I'm celebrating it. Let's put that money in our classrooms where it belongs. And let me tell you how we do that. We make sure that the administrators know that parents want the money serving their child, they want it supporting their teacher, and the administrators know if they are not facilitating a high quality education, which every single parent wants.
Can you disagree with her
then they can leave.
On the profiteers and the money not going directly to the student in the classroom?
It sounded beautiful, Mandy.
But no. Do you disagree with the fact of the part about the profiteers and the unions and the money is not really going for the student?
I see people that are part
100%?
Slightly. About
we got $34 million football
Federation of
stadiums.
Teachers, American Federation of Teachers. These are people on the front lines that care about public education just as much. These people aren't profiteers. These people don't have a lot of money. These people are on the front lines, just like you said, and they care equally about teachers as well. So I think both of you are a little bit out of touch.
How in the world are they advocating for teachers?
I hear
when
from
the
union
teacher
members
pay
every
has
day
not gone up?
that say, why are we going to take billions of dollars and put it into a system and none of us know it's going to work? You talk about Maine, West Virginia. We're here in Texas. I live in H-Town. We have public schools that need more funds. We have teachers that work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and they're not getting paid for all those hours because they're just there and they care about kids.
Corey, hear Corey's voice, Corey.
I think we agree that the money's not making its way into the classroom. It goes towards administrative bloat and staffing surges. About a dozen superintendents in Texas make more than the President of the United States, Joe Biden, making over $400,000 a year. It's not making its way to the classroom because the current government school monopoly does not have any incentive to spend those additional dollars wisely. In fact, there have been 5 studies on the topic. It's not a lot, but it's a pretty interesting body of research. All 5 of them find that private and charter school competition leads to better outcomes in the public schools, but also higher teacher salaries in the public school system. So I think this is one way for the teachers to benefit as well. It should be a win-win solution to benefit students and parents. Obviously, they're getting more choices, but it benefits the employees in the system because their problem isn't with their competition, charter and private schools. The problem is with the district that's a monopoly that has no incentive to spend money wisely. And Jaime pointed out earlier that he thought that this would defund public schools. I want to ask him, why do you think giving families a choice would defund public schools if they're doing a good job?
Respond and anything else you want to add before we go to break.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say is that there seems to be a fundamental lack of misunderstanding about the public school finance system, right? We fund each student individually by their attendance, right? So we do fund students. And one of the ways in which voucher systems, voucher programs will defund public education, as we've seen in Florida, as we've seen in Arizona, as we've seen in Wisconsin and Illinois and Indiana, is that when, just this year, they appropriated $485 million to their voucher program. That's expected to balloon to $900 million over the next year.
Hold that point. Hold it. When we come back, we talk about significant rises in enrollment with our panel, more of crisis in the classroom.
I just don't understand how we can be okay with taking money away from public schools. So that's why I'm here, is to fight for public schools.
Parents first should be empowered at a minimum to drive the educational outcomes and experiences of their children in the best ways that they see fit.
Reporting from the journalists here at News 4 San Antonio show Texas charter schools have seen a significant rise in enrollment recently. Stacy, we'll start with you. What do you think is really driving that spike in charter school enrollment, and do you actually think that it comes at the expense of public schools?
Well, charters, firstly, are public schools, and that's why I'm an advocate of charter schools.
Okay.
But I feel like parents need more options as it relates to what they haven't seen work in some of their neighborhoods. For example, I live very close to Fifth Ward in Houston, Texas. There wasn't a school that met the needs of autistic students in the 10-mile radius of Fifth Ward. So someone came up and they filled out an application to create a charter school in the Fifth Ward specifically for autistic students. That's good for kids. So I'm definitely a proponent of public charters. I think there needs to be more education around the fact that charter schools and putting more in Texas is not a slight to traditional public schools, but that is completely different from vouchers and this ESA that may be passed in the next 2 weeks.
Kurt, why do you think more students are turning to Texas charter schools, and is the evidence that parents here in Texas want more school choice, not at the expense of public education?
Well, I think a part of it over the last few years at least has been that parents saw a problem with the curriculum in the public school system over remote learning or Zoom school. And I think Jaime and I could actually agree and find common ground here, where the better solution isn't from the top down to ban a certain concept or to promote a certain concept. I think the problem is with the one-size-fits-all nature of the current government-run school system, that by definition, you're never going to have everybody having exactly what they want, because we trap people into a one-size-fits-all system that You know, you have one group of parents or one group or a special interest controlling what other people's children learn and how they're raised. The better solutions from the bottom up. Give the funding to the family and let them choose an institution, including a charter school, that works best for them when it comes to academically, but also aligns with their values at the same time.
You know, I mean, I think what is obvious from this conversation, I do want you to respond to Corey, is that both sides want the same thing, but it's the path for how we get there.
You know, I think that there's some truth to that, but you know, when we demonize public education as calling them government-funded schools, and when we use language that is so divisive between us, when we're talking about
we?
In this conversation right now, we're talking about you know, Texans. We're trying to say that teachers are not as caring to their children. Their parents too.
Did someone say that?
No,
I didn't hear that.
No one says that.
I mean, I did not hear that time.
Then I think one of the things that we do in this conversation is we try and divide what public schools do for Texans and the state, and we are trying to divide Texans from the communities that they build in their schools. And so one of the things that I feel that charter schools have done in the state, you know, is kind of build some of that community in the spaces where they are. They are public schools, and so they do a lot of the things that public schools do. The problem with vouchers and implementing a whole entirely separate, entirely unequal system of education is that we would be catering to about 200,000 private school students currently, as opposed to doing something that would help the 5.5 million Texas public school students.
But I think the argument that you make is that if public schools were doing their jobs, there would be no need for private schools. And why should a parent not give their child the best opportunity at an education?
That's it. Every parent, this transcends race, socioeconomics, anything. Every parent loves their child and wants what's best for them. You know, I believe, if I read correctly, you went to private school yourself. And your parents, I don't know if they wrote a check for it or if you were one of the beneficiaries of a scholarship, but they did whatever was necessary to put you in a private school. And the fact is that so many parents say, my school is not serving me, whatever that is. And let me be clear. We say, look, we have a crisis in the classroom. We listened to the Texas Education Agency Commissioner testify last year saying that only 19% of our curriculum is on grade level. 19%, y'all. There is a crisis in our classrooms. There is a crisis of low expectations. And I am tired of having mothers come up to me and cry on my shoulders because they are trapped in a school that is not serving their child. Or maybe they're trapped in a school that their child's being bullied in. Like the mom who reached out to me, whose son tried to hang himself because he has Asperger's and is bullied, and they worked with the school and they just could not get there. Or the mother that said that a superintendent at a Conroe that said the superintendent does not care that she asked for some of the culture wars that a specific teacher, a rogue teacher, but that is absolutely in her classroom, is teaching her children counter to her values. This is real. And let's also talk about kids. Over 50% of the kids in Texas public schools cannot read on grade level.
Let me go back to something she said about the low expectations, Stacey. Does it concern you, the soft bigotry of low expectations? Because it does exist.
Absolutely. It does exist. And I think when I was a teacher and my colleagues, we all had high expectations for students, but that wasn't echo across Texas. Sure. I still don't think that the answer is to remove money from public schools, public school teachers, and put it in private schools. We don't know if that's going to work. Hold on. I have talked to teachers across Texas that work their butts off. And they go to professional development, they ask for feedback, they're getting appraised, they're doing everything that they're supposed to do, and they're still not meeting the mark. It's not just the teacher's fault. It's not just the principal's fault. It's not just the public ISD's fault. Everybody has to help teach this child African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. So the parent needs help. The community leaders need to step in. It's not just taking money from the public schools. That's not the answer.
Where is that help?
the money doesn't belong to the government schools. Education funding is meant for educating children, not for propping up and protecting a particular institution. And if you like your public school, you can keep it. But you shouldn't, attend private school yourself and then turn around and say low-income families and other families shouldn't have that same kind of opportunity with this kind of education savings account program. So mathematically, the public schools will end up with higher per student funding amounts. You mentioned Arizona and Florida earlier. Both of these states, as they've expanded school choice, the public schools have improved. 10 out of 11 studies in Florida find statistically significant positive effects of private school choice competition on the outcomes in the public schools. This is a win-win solution. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. And because only a fraction of the funding, let's say $8,000 to $10,000 per student in Texas, would follow the student to the private school if they choose to do so, because that's the choice of the family, which if they like their public school, they can keep it. The public schools in Texas spend about $14,000 per student, so they get to keep thousands of dollars for students they're no longer educating. On a per student basis, mathematically, they must end up with higher per student revenues and expenditures. So this is a win-win for the schools and the students.
Yeah, but I want to come to you. Is there anything about charter schools that gives you hope?
Charter schools do many public charter schools in Texas do a lot of great work. I know many public charter school teachers who work with their students all day, every day, and provide their students the resources that they need.
Now respond to him.
What I think is the issue here, and I appreciate you bringing up my high school. I went to the oldest all-boys Catholic high school in Texas, St. Thomas High School. And one of the things is great that you brought that up, because that school, it costs about $34,000 a year currently to go to that school. And they just expanded their footprint. They bought an entire brand new school in Houston right next door, and they are not increasing their enrollment. So they're expanding their footprint. They have a $34,000 a year tuition. And so what is your voucher going to do for all of for this choice for people who don't have the extra $15,000 it's going to take to go to a school like that? What you're doing is you're creating a coupon for wealthy parents to take to elite schools, and then we're going to create a McDonald's have it your way kind of.
Let me talk about an op-ed.
On every corner.
There was a Texas teacher who wrote an op-ed against school choice in the Dallas Morning News. I don't know if you read it or not, earlier this year. And he said switching school actually decreases the chances of a student graduating. Is that a fair criticism of school choice? And
no, and I don't even know.
But how can they come to this conclusion, though?
Look, the education establishment that controls every bit of funding can say nonsense all that they want, like the fact that your school you're talking about is $34,000. I looked today, it says $24,000, and there's an asterisk that says there is an over $11,000 tuition assistance. Please don't leave that out. So if a parent got a $10,000, if they got a $10,000 education savings account, they can do that. I'm fully aware there are benefactors that help underwrite and support children that need a better school. And the fact is, as a parent, sir, as a parent, you cannot love my children like I do. You do not know what is best like I do. I know what's best. And every parent in Texas, which is why we have the momentum. Now, talking about a teacher that wrote it. Look, I don't know why they say that. It's my kids.
I can tell you why.
It's every other child. It's the parents' decision of what will serve them.
I'm not going to leave it. Tell us why.
They say that. There are certain markers that makes a student considered at risk.
Yes.
Low income, whether or not they were kept back a grade or not, whether or not they've transitioned, they're considered transient, whether they've been to one or two or more schools throughout their trajectory. That does wreak havoc on a student's trajectory, K through 12, if they're switching schools. So that Dallas teacher is correct.
Yeah, but the parents.
Wait, hold on. I get to respond.
You talked about parents. Parents across Texas, if we look up the numbers, don't want this system.
That's not
We're talking about
They
parents.
Look at the latest polling from UT Austin, University of Houston, Dallas Morning News.
We are going to talk about this, so go ahead and talk about it. Yes, please.
So when we're talking about how does this improve the lives of kids, Florida is a great example. When they passed private school choice in 2002 and implemented in 2003, their low-income demographic, their low-income students that are most disadvantaged, ranked number 33 in the nation on the NAEP scores. The NAEP is the nation's report card. How does every kid compare? Within 16 years of introducing private school choice, Florida's students went from number 33, their low-income students, to number 1, and they are still number 1 today when adjusted for demographics. Indiana is another example. They, at the same period of time, did the same thing. They said, let's try something. Their low-income demographic ranked 22nd, and they're now number 3.
We're going to talk about test scores when we come out of break. But before I go to break, I want to go to I wanted to go to Jaime about, but listen, we'll just go to break and come back. I'll come back to you. Don't go away.
Public schools remain the most inclusive option. Your tax dollars provide resources to help certified teachers, specialists, paraprofessionals, and administrators ensure quality Tier 1 instruction for all of them.
You know, I'm so honored to moderate this well-experienced panel that brings so many different perspectives on this issue of school choice in public schools. Again, Corey DeAngelis is a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children and a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Mandy Drogan is campaign director for Next Generation Texas and the former president of the Texas Federation for Children, PAC. Stacy Childs is a member of the Texas State Board of Education, what an honor, and a former 4th and 5th grade teacher in Texas. And Haiku Man Pente is the director of economic opportunity for the organization. Every Texan. Panelists, again, thank you for a wonderful conversation. You know, what I like to do is start here. How do we solve the public school crisis? How do we? I mean, it all is an indictment of public schools. How?
I think we need to start listening a little more. I think sometimes we take for granted that teachers aren't the ones that spend the most time with students throughout the school day, even sometimes more than parents. Think about the parents that when they get home, latchkey kids come home, the parents are still not there, so they're having to do the homework by themselves. The teachers are the ones that sometimes know what the students need. We need to listen to those teachers more.
You know, I wanted to come to Haimu because to stay on this issue with public schools. You know, in public schools in Texas, not just Texas, but across the entire United States, Black and Hispanic students are often less likely to graduate than their counterparts. What do you say to parents who feel like the public education system is failing students of color?
I would say that is a historic issue that we've been dealing with since the Civil Rights Movement, and it's a continuous effort. We do have problems, but we have grown since then. You know, one of the things that since Texas only desegregated its public education system in 1976, you know, that's one of the things that we are still dealing with is the historic, systemic racial inequities that our state was in part founded upon. And so it wasn't until the mid-1970s that Black and brown students in Houston ISD, for example, were allowed to go to school with white students. And it wasn't until then that we started taking into account the fact that how much we invest in the education of all students, no matter their zip code, their race, creed, color, where they live, it matters how much we invest in that public education, and it matters how much we provide them with the resources they need to learn.
Thank you, Jaime. You know, Corey, the National Assessment of Education Progress found last year not a single major urban school district saw improvements in math scores. Why do you think so many of our largest, most well-funded districts struggle to teach core subjects like math?
Because money's not the answer to the problem or every problem. It's a definition of insanity, just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We shouldn't throw more money at the problem. We should invest in students, not schools. The funding should follow the child to the education provider that works best for them. That creates a competitive pressure for the public schools to up their game in response to that competition and do a better job. Again, school choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's a win-win for the students, obviously, but also the kids who remain in the public schools because of those competitive pressures. 29 studies exist on this topic. 26 of 29 studies find positive effects of school choice competition on the outcomes in public schools, and there's been a peer-reviewed meta-analysis by a UT Austin researcher, Jabbar, and her team, published in Educational Policy in 2019, also finding, if you pull all the studies together, more school choice, better outcomes in the public schools. We don't want to destroy or defund or hurt the public schools. We want to make them better. This is the way to do it.
You know, Stacy, I'm sure you have so much you want to add to this discussion, but I remember during our previous town hall meeting when you joined us, when you were a teacher, you talked about students in your 5th grade classroom couldn't read. Surely parents in Texas have had similar observations. How do you think public school performance plays into the school choice conversation? And how did you, as a teacher, refuse to allow those kids fail reading, and you found the formula where they could and did learn?
I absolutely refused. It took a lot of work. That means I was in tutorials from 3 p.m. when the school let out until about 6 or 7. It meant Saturday tutorials. It meant having powwows where we were having pep rallies and we were like, we'll do anything just to let you pass. You can do it. It was celebrating the small wins. But I don't think that just demonizing public schools is where we need to go in terms of making outcomes better for students. I mean, I think No Child Left Behind, when George Bush passed that policy, created a culture for teachers such that I'll do whatever it takes just to push kids to the next grade level. And that created a culture of by any means necessary. So some of the students went from the 1st grade to the 2nd grade, not necessarily meeting the standards, but they went to the 2nd grade. So then when they got to 5th grade, they got to my class, they didn't know, a lot of them didn't know how to read, and I was busy playing catch up. Taking money from that public school and just putting it into a private school is not necessarily the answer. We just need to laser focus on the data, laser focus on the students and their individualized needs to make sure they get to the next grade level.
You know, man, I keep hearing this theme of demonizing public schools.
No one is demonizing public schools. We are shining a light and breaking the culture of silence. Stacy is a phenomenal advocate for kids. I have watched you on the school board. I have cheered you on when you were fighting for charter schools. And as a mother, I am so grateful that you fight for your children in your classroom. And I sincerely mean that. The majority of teachers are doing everything they can to support students. But as she noted, we can look at the data. We can see that something is wrong. We had to pass a law a couple years ago to tell ISDs to teach phonics because 50 years of studies say that it is significantly better than whole world. And let me tell you, there are still ISDs in Texas. Mom and dad, if your kid is not learning to read by phonics, go to the school board meeting, go to the principal and fight back.
I learned how to read. I learned how to read by phonics. Yes.
But I'm telling you,
everybody can argue with phonics.
Right, it works. But I'm telling you, we still have to. There are still school systems in Texas, and then again we say, well, they just can't do it. And she's right. We do have a culture of just consistently passing kids, and we've created. The TEA has this whole document that explains what exceeds, meets, approaches, and does not meet. Look, we've got districts that are claiming that approaches means that a kid is really close, but they cut out the definition that it means with targeted intervention. We absolutely need to do that. To trust a parent, and let me be clear, we've done this. People don't want to talk about the fact that we have choice with public charter schools, but we also passed almost unanimously, very bipartisan, SB 1716. That was the supplemental special education services. These were grants in 2021 that passed, and it was for special needs students who during the COVID shutdowns did not get their services. And the governor in his wisdom said, wait a second, we have tens of thousands of children that are not getting what they need. I'm going to create a program to make sure that parents who are there in the house with them can have access to their allocated funding and use it to get tutoring and therapies and goods that were approved goods and services for educational. It is wildly successful. We have had over 70,000 kids that used it. It works. This is not some new concept here in Texas. All we're saying is to acknowledge that every child doesn't learn the same.
And also acknowledge what works.
It works.
Jaime, according to the San Antonio Public Library, the city of San Antonio has one of the lowest literacy rates in the nation, one of the lowest. About 25% of adults living here are functionally illiterate, are not able to read at a 5th grade level. Do you see that as an indictment of your public school system?
I don't see that as an indictment of the public school system. I see that as an indictment of our society that has structurally defunded public education over the last 20 years. You know, one of the things, like, since I think Mandy mentioned that, you know, what is the number you said, 166% growth in school spending since 1970. Yeah, but if you look at the growth in terms of student enrollment, if you look at the way
it's per student,
it's per student. We've increased
so
it by 166%.
So you just said defunded, but we've increased by 166% after adjusting for inflation.
Still behind
so we've increased.
We are 34th in the nation in how much we spend per student.
But you just said defunded as if the funding
we
went
have
down.
defunded. So if you look at 2008, after the 2008 recession, we took $5 billion from the public education system. We have not put that money back.
Yes, we did. We just passed a $10.3 billion appropriation literally this year. Y'all, it's the largest appropriation ever.
That money it does not go to the classrooms. That money goes to tax cuts and tax breaks. That's part of
that is factually inaccurate. There was $7 billion for tax cuts to buy down M&O. That's how much. So if we're talking tax cuts, if that's what you're trying to talk the numbers here, it was $7 billion on top of the $10.3 billion.
Whoever is
These
writing the data
numbers are factual, and they matter.
Though.
They matter because this rhetoric that parents like myself, who again send my child to a public school, but that also has traveled this great state, hearing from so many parents that said, you know, I love my public school system. My oldest child excelled, but my youngest child needs something different. Please stop stating things that are completely false. I stand with teachers and I fight to get money in the classroom. What I also fight against is wasted funds that go for profiteers that do not benefit students. And when you
I'm not stating anything that's
words like profiteers. Who is profiteering?
I have a question.
Who is profiteering? How have we raised spending by 166% when adjusted for inflation, sir, and we're not sending it into our classrooms? Who's profiteering? Let's see. Who built $35 million football stadiums?
Now you're conflating two different things.
No, I am not.
Taxpayers are paying. The majority of failing schools here in San Antonio are concentrated in the poorest areas of town. The same areas that historically have had the lowest graduation rates, the highest number of dropouts, and the largest number of students deemed not ready for college. And I'm going to ask this question of you and Stacey, Corey, because we hear a lot of public school leaders talk about equity, but is that an issue? Is it about equity or is it something else?
Yeah, look, the most advantaged in society already have some form of private school choice. They can either pay out of pocket for private school tuition and fees, or they can move to a neighborhood that's assigned to the best quote-unquote public schools, because these aren't public schools. They're not available to everyone. They discriminate on the basis of zip code. Families have gone to jail in some states for lying about their address to get into a better so-called public school. So they are more accurately defined as government-run schools. But when you fund the student directly, give that $10,000 or so per student directly to the family to direct for their own children, that's going to lead to more educational opportunity, more equity of opportunity when it comes to your educational success. Because again, the most advantaged have school choice, so we should allow the disadvantaged to have education freedom as well.
And let me say this, listen, there's a lot of passion on this panel because they care. It's not that they argue, it's not disrespect, it's that they care. But every now and then I have to kind of, and it's not because I'm not disagreeing or agreeing, it's just that we just want to appear to be civil because people's interpretations are not always our own. Sure. I know everybody cares. But Stacey, let me come back to you. The same question I asked Corey before we without the break.
Corey, I generally understand what you're saying, but you take for granted that the average person can just move and go to the public school of their choice in the neighborhood. That means they have to have good credit to get an apartment, or they have to have good enough credit to buy a house or be approved for a mortgage.
That's my point, though.
And right, so why are we not putting money into the public schools where they live? Why would we give them a voucher and go to some private school? Hold on. Where we don't know if private schools are being held accountable to the same standards. They're not being held accountable to the same
I'm going to come back to break. We're coming back with our all-star panel. And when we return, we're going to talk about school safety about Valdez. Only 90 minutes from where we are right now. More Crisis in the Classroom. Don't go away.
That's because they want a more specific way or specific type of education for their child that might not be offered at their public schools.
Only about 90 minutes away from Uvalde, the site of the most tragic school shooting in the history of this country. Do you think there's a connection between, let's say, this push for school choice and the demand for public safety?
Yeah, I think absolutely. But I do want to point out that Stacy said that some private schools might not be accountable, but the reality is underperforming private schools shut down. Underperforming government schools get more and more money year after year. Families know their children's educational needs and have the most on-the-ground knowledge and incentive to get that decision right. So they can vote with their feet and hold schools accountable that way. That is the strongest form of accountability. But when it comes to school safety, yes, of course, families choose schools for a lot of different reasons. We focused a lot on math and reading test scores during this panel tonight, but families care about choosing a school that aligns with their values. They also want their kid in a safe environment. And in fact, if you look at the latest meta-analysis on the topic in a journal called Educational Policy, I actually did it myself with my co-author, finding that all of the evidence basically that exists on the topic, there's about 11 studies, find that private school choice and charter school choice leads to more safety for students than they had before. So school safety is totally an important reason why parents should be able to choose the school that works best for their kid.
You know, let me go to you. I don't want to get your take on this. Could public school safety in Texas be, let's say, negatively impacted if school vouchers become the law of the land?
Oh, most definitely. You know, one of the things that we saw passed was a school safety bill that created a mandate for an armed officer on every school campus, and the state did not fully fund that. You see districts across the state who are struggling to comply with that particular directive.
Well, why would you struggle to protect these kids?
Because they don't have the money to pay for another armed officer. It costs a lot of money to pay for a police officer or a school marshal or someone, you know, a armed security guard to be on every single campus. That's a lot of funding that is being taken out of the classroom. And so schools most definitely want to make sure their students are protected, but they do not have the resources. They were passed an unfunded mandate by the state to do that. And with
there was over $1 billion. There was over $1 billion sent with this. He's not correct. It was $1.3 billion. I got the numbers.
Speak to the superintendents across the state, and they'll tell you different.
I think we need to just do a public school tour across Texas, because we're spewing out all these numbers. We're talking about these numbers that parents have no knowledge of, when some of these public schools have been dilapidated, underfunded, not locks on the doors. The buildings are about to fall apart, right? And until we have people standing up for public schools saying, hey, we do need more funding, not just because, not to put it in the superintendent's pocket, but to help all across the school, that may be the answer.
What about workforce improvement, and why are these buildings falling apart?
So when we're talking, this is exactly what empowering parents means. Let's be clear. We want to see the money being used to educate students, which includes ensuring that their buildings are safe, that they have resources in their classroom. That is what empowering parents is. Look, the highest take-up rate in the entire country for private school choice is about 5.5% of students that actually choose to go to a different school. So let's be clear. The majority of Texans will always go to public school. just like my own kid. But the fact is that the money is not being spent. How do we keep pouring more and more money and our test results keep getting bad? How is it that we have a mental health crisis and we are more concerned with keeping a kid in a classroom that is a part of all of this instead of ensuring that they are in an environment that best serves them?
How is it?
Why we're so passionate about it, Mindy. You just said it. The majority of students across Texas will go to public school. So why would we take the majority of the funding in the special session and take it towards vouchers?
Stacey, we're not taking the majority. Just so we're clear.
We're talking nearly $14 billion.
No, ma'am. No, the money, look.
The money
is already allocated.
Here's a good news. This
million.
conversation will continue. Not here, but with parents, with teachers, and administrators. It's important. You all have started the conversation. You shine a light on some important topics here today. And this conversation has to continue at home because what you said is true. It takes all stakeholders to resolve this issue. Not one can do it alone. The parents, the teachers, the communities, the superintendent, and especially the students. Everyone has to be involved. Famed surgeon and former HUD Secretary Ben Carson and civil rights attorney Ben Crump and I wrote a book, Crisis in the Classroom. Be sure to read and see if you are doing all you can for your children in and out of the classroom. Get Crisis in the Classroom wherever it's sold in bookstores today or on Amazon.com. Let us thank all of our panelists for this great discussion. And remember, this is only the beginning of the conversation. Be sure to follow Crisis in the Classroom on all social media platforms for the latest education news, not just from here in Texas, but all around the nation. From San Antonio, I'm Armstrong Williams. Have a great night.